Good morning, everybody. I am Tracy Stuckrath, founder and host of the Eating at a Meeting podcast, which you are listening to now. And I am in a ballroom in Las Vegas. It is the start of IMEX America today with Smart Monday Education. But I wanted to come live to you this week. I'm actually coming live all week here. But today I really wanted to do this because today is Indigenous Peoples Day. And I think it's really important for us to understand that the day, which used to be called Columbus Day, is now called Indigenous People Day, and it honors the cultures and histories of the Native American people in the original inhabitants of who were the original inhabitants of North America. And I'm so excited, and I always do this wrong, to have this gentleman here with me, right to my right, left, whatever it is on your screen. His name, he's Chef Sean Sherman, and he is the CEO and founder of the Sioux Chef, and he's the owner and restaurant at Owamni, which is, I hope I said that right, Sean.
You did.
Is good, yes. Is the just won a James Beard Award for Best New Restaurant, and so welcome to the show, Sean.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So, well, congratulations on the James Beard, and that's your second one, right?
Third.
Third one.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So,
One for the nonprofit for a leadership award, and one for this new one for best new restaurant in the U.S.
congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
So I wanted to, first of all, you're on here because you are a Native American and you are educating about Native American cuisine. So can you tell the audience about what you're doing?
Yeah. So I grew up on Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. So I'm enrolled with the Ogalala Lakota Sioux tribe. And I started working on indigenous food projects quite a few years back because I grew up in restaurants. Basically, I was working in restaurants from the time I was 13 onward, all through high school and college. And I moved to Minneapolis after college and became a chef at a pretty young age in the city. And a few years into my chef career, just realized the complete absence of indigenous anything out there in the colony world. There was no books on it, barely. There was really no restaurants at that time. And even growing up on a reservation, I knew very little about my own Lakota heritage. So it set me on a path to understand what my ancestors were eating, what were they growing, how were they harvesting things, what was their knowledge of food. And then eventually I started doing dinners, and I created a company called the Sioux Chef, which is a play on words because it's SIOUX, and just started really focusing on indigenous foods of North America. And part of the work we did was cut out colonial ingredients of things that were introduced. So we removed dairy, wheat flour, cane sugar, and typically beef, pork, and chicken. And really focused on a lot of native heirloom products like corns and beans and squash and sunflowers and chilies. Lots of wild food everywhere, so really getting an understanding of that ethnobotanical kind of perspective of the world around us. And just really looking at a lot of cooking techniques and really understanding the true diversity of North America, because it's pretty intense and there's a lot to understand.
So there is a lot to understand. And so going back to doing the research of your ancestors, did you talk to your grandparents about that? How did you find out that information?
Well, most of my grandparents passed away by the time I was out of high school. And I wish I could have had conversations with my grandparents going backwards, because they were still fluent in Lakota. Lakota was their first language, and there was just a lot I could have asked them questions about. Because when I started digging in history, like how far back in my family lineage did my ancestors have full 100% of their indigenous education intact? And it was just my great grandparents' generation, because they were the ones that went through the changeover, being forced onto reservations, through seeing their children go through assimilation in boarding schools. And it was less than 100 years from my birth that things really went south. So I did talk to a lot of elders in my family and other people that I just knew. But even the elders at that point in history had gone through the same kind of assimilation and boarding school situation. So a lot of information was still already lost. So it just took me a different way of kind of digging through history and really looking at things through a culinary lens to understand how people were surviving and the ways, the foods that they were utilizing, and just starting to showcase like the amazing bounty that we have across North America, and that amazing diversity, and looking at all the different ways people were utilizing the food systems around them, and that deep connection that us as Indigenous peoples have with the world around us, with the plants, and understanding the relationships that we have with this world and with the plants around us and the animals. So there's just so much to understand, and having this restaurant and having the cookbook and all these and the nonprofit and all the work, it's really just trying to voice that. It's not about becoming a famous chef and getting that attention. It's about diverting that attention towards what the real situation is, of just understanding Indigenous peoples and understanding the amount of violence and pain we had to endure just to be here today.
That there is so much to unpack there. I mean, and I think I read it in one of the articles, that was the many articles that have been written about what you're doing, is what we learned in school, right? And when you went to boarding school, what you probably learned about your ancestors was like this much, right? Or that it was just there for, in Jamestown, right? And for Thanksgiving. And that's kind of really what we don't learn about, all of that other displacement and things that happened. And so thank you for sharing the knowledge that you're finding about it. I think it's really important. And my friend Joel Schaefer, he's another chef. He's like, that's really cool, chef, what you're doing. So he just piped in on that. But you were talking about the native and the local foods, and that's something that's really kind of started to come about, like eat local, right? But we don't even think about what that really means in the context of what you're teaching. And I think that's really important. We're just thinking of like buying from our local farmer, from the farmer's market, but that's still not using necessarily native, foods that are native to our country.
Yeah, I think that you have to think beyond it a little bit, because obviously in the culinary world, we had the farm to table movement, and we saw people like Ellis Waters, for example, and really showcasing like why it's important to purchase from local producers. But we also have to identify the amount of privilege that's out there with people, because a lot of these farms, it's hard for people of color to have any kind of land access and to get into some of those kinds of farmers markets. Because if you look at privately owned land in the U.S. today, it's still 98% Eurocentric,
Wow.
And that's a direct result of the colonialism that happened across the 1800s. So I use this platform to talk a lot about the history to kind of showcase that privilege, So not only should we be focusing on local, but we should really be focusing on really supporting people. So at my restaurant, we try and prioritize purchasing from Indigenous producers first, locally, then nationally. Then we support our BIPOC producers around us next, because they just have so much less privilege when it comes to getting into the market and having resources and funds, I see places, with this farm to table movement, if you look at some of these farms, like they're just dripping with privilege, because their ancestors acquired this land 150-ish years ago, and they're still using that as a financial resource, and that land, if you back in history, you're always going to find it comes from removing Indigenous peoples from these landscapes to acquire that land space.
And there's so much work to be done on that, and understanding where that comes from. And just thinking about the farmers that I have I'm in Eastern North Carolina, where I live, and my farmers market is mostly not farmers. It's mostly, arts and crafts and things like that. So it's trying to go out and find those in Eastern North Carolina. Who are the farmers out there besides the 3 that are there, who I do buy from? But
yeah, and it's just it's just that systematic situation of just keeping people down. Because if you look at this whole farm bill that was trying to support Black farmers in the South, and all of the hurdles that are being thrown in front of that, after just, an entire century of trying to hinder Black farmers from becoming successful. And it's the same situation with Indigenous peoples across the U.S. when it comes down to it, of just like having very little resources, very little training, and very little land access to be able to get out there and utilize the land to grow healthy food.
And I want to jump a little bit to another aspect of that too, is the fact, and you've said this a couple of times in different articles, is like we can go around and it's again pre-colonization, but we've brought Hispanic, Mexican, and Italian and Mediterranean foods, and we can go into any city in the country basically and find those restaurants and find cooking classes about that, but we don't find what's native to us, right? In Native American restaurants or Native American cooking classes. And so that's what your whole mission is.
Absolutely. It's just showcasing what are the true foods of where you might be standing, and we're in North America,
Right.
and you look at some of these other cuisines and they've adopted foods that came from the Americas into their own. So if you're looking at Italian food and you're learning about polenta with tomato sauce, like that's literally North American foods, and, so I think we have to really understand the history of foods, and just the accomplishments and what people gave to the rest of the world from this side of the world, and there's so much, and, our U.S. history books have really twisted it to really showcase and focus and highlight the colonial history of the United States and showcase that that's a good thing. When in actuality, like they skip over, a century or like a couple of centuries of extreme violence towards Indigenous peoples, to dislodge them from land spaces to be able to utilize that for what we see today. So I think there's just a lot of education out there for people to understand, because so many, even adults our age, don't even know much about U.S. history because
Right.
it's been basically hidden from us. And we're at a weird time in history where states are starting to reverse this again and move backwards and re-whitewashing
Right.
it, and making it
Right.
really dangerous for educators to even teach about things that people should know about.
Well, and I think one of the where you got a lot of attention last summer, I think it was last summer, was with when George Floyd. Was it last summer or the summer before?
It was 2020. It was just
2020. Okay.
it was at the end of May in 2020.
Okay.
Yeah. So shortly
And you
after
just
the kind of rolled out.
and you just went out to the neighborhoods and you started feeding people. You wanted to connect with people with the food, right? And I love that. And you started feeding not
Yeah.
only the people in your neighborhood but the reservations.
Well, we saw so much destruction happen around us because, like, where our nonprofit kitchen, the Indigenous Food Lab, we had just moved into that space right as the pandemic was rolling out, and then George Floyd happened, and down that street on Lake Street in Minneapolis is where the social uprising really centered, and so much of that area was completely destroyed. So all the buildings around us just completely burned down to the ground, and so much of our neighborhood was just left without food access during a really critical time period. So, myself and a few of our team members got together and just started getting food out there, and we found money to be able to help support. So we just continued to do what we did, which was just supporting and getting healthy Indigenous foods out there. And, we did that throughout that whole summer. And then as the winter rolled on, we started sending foods directly to Minnesota tribes. So we were working with 9 out of the 11 tribes in Minnesota. And for a while there throughout that winter, we were sending 10,000 meals a week through our very small kitchen with a staff of less than 16 people.
Excuse me. Oh, that was loud
So,
in this big ballroom. Okay, so healthy Indigenous food. So let's talk about what that is, because one of the things with the restaurant, there is no, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's no pork, no chicken, no beef, no, and you said earlier, no sugar, no dairy, no wheat flour, no black pepper, and
no ranch dressing.
and say that again.
No ranch dressing.
No ranch dressing. Oh my gosh, the things that are in the prepackaged ranch dressing, it's gross. I mean, I can totally eat at your restaurant, and I'm going to take a road trip with my friend Sarah to come up to Minnesota to come eat there. So what is on your menu? And I actually have 3 of your menus, or I have the menus that are on your website pulled up, but what do you serve if you don't have that, which is what people expect to eat?
The menu is kind of family style. We just want people to order and try a bunch of things, so you get all these plates that come out, and there's just a lot of flavors to try. We have a lot of game, so we have a lot of bison, elk, venison, duck, goose, quail, all sorts of freshwater lake fish, just because we live in the Great Lakes region. So there's all sorts of trout, walleyes and northerns and things like that. We also utilize some of the foods we can feature other regions. So sometimes we're featuring foods from the Southwest or Mexico or the Pacific Northwest or the East Coast or wherever. So we bring in specialty foods, especially as we find indigenous producers to purchase from, and highlight recipes that really represent a particular region. We use tons of heirloom native corn products that comes from quite a few different native nations across the U.S. We have all sorts of native heirloom beans, and we purchase a lot of produce from some native farmers nearby us in Minnesota. So during the summertime, we just get a lot of really cool heirloom produce, squash and beans and corns and all sorts of greens and herbs and things like that. And there's just, so much that we can create, and we're not trying to do traditional recipes necessarily. We're just creating indigenous pantries and coming up with all sorts of creative ways to showcase what are true North American flavors, and lots of wild foods, so we utilize a lot of things coming from here, like rose hips and high bush cranberries and white cedar and balsam fir and hyssop and bergamot and things that's just you see just look glancing around, and there's a lot to explore.
That's awesome. So we just got a question on here. I mean, it makes me want to know where I can get a lot of these products. And somebody just asked, for those who can't travel to Minnesota, is there a plan for ordering and shipping across the U.S.?
Down the road, we're through our nonprofit at our Indigenous Food Lab Kitchen. We're just about ready to release our first model of a native market. So there'll be a space for people to come and purchase Indigenous food products from all of these producers that we've been curating. And eventually we'll be able to create an online portal for people to start to order directly through us from that. And that's all coming out of our nonprofit. And we did that under our nonprofit because we just want that to be able to support some of the work that we do. We want to be able to create pantry boxes for food relief efforts for those in need. And we just want to replicate this model and move it around all over the place. So we're already looking at possibilities in Anchorage, Alaska, Bozeman, Montana, Rapid City, South Dakota, and eventually beyond. And each one of those Indigenous food labs becomes a center point for more development, research, support, and food access. And it's just creating these distribution points all over the place, basically. So we just have this large vision of just becoming this massive support center that also retains an immense amount of Indigenous knowledge for future generations.
So, and because I'm a meeting planner, so I'm thinking as well as distribution. When you're sourcing it, you're one restaurant at the moment, right? Is there enough, and is there enough currently to actually distribute large quantities, and or with the help of you and recognizing, can you help these farmers grow, to make, but you need land as well. So I know it's a kind of hard situation at the
I believe we are because we are ramping up a lot of demand, and there's just a lot of interest, and our purchasing power alone has grown extremely large, and we're just able to bring pallets and pallets of Indigenous food products in. And you really look at what's available. Like some Indigenous foods obviously won't be commercially available. Some of the wild foods are so delicate to the ecosystems that we would never want to, see those on the market, because some things should we have to have this relationship with plants. We have to know how they work, and we don't want to destroy colonies for that colonial aspect of just extraction for profit. We want to be able to appreciate as we move around. So sometimes we can highlight and showcase some very special flavors, but some things, most of the things on the menu are just things that we can get on a large scale, and we just build around it, and we just try to make food taste like where we happen to be. So the food has a really definitive story to tell.
That's fantastic. And somebody just piped in, and I'm gonna highlight you because I think it's my friend Joan, because she's talking in DC, but she's like, it would be great if you had greater involvement in DC with the National Museum of Native American History. That would make sense.
Yeah, and and even the Museum of the Native American, like they've had a Native American restaurant, but it's run by a non-Indigenous restaurant group, and it's really been cut back because of the pandemic. And I'm really happy that they hired my chef friend Freddie Bitsoe. But we should really have Indigenous peoples. They should really be purchasing Indigenous food products from Indigenous peoples. They should really be very intentional of how they move forward. And our nonprofit can help with situations like that. We're happy to help set up situations for food service operations, whether it's a museum or university or school system or or any tribes around us. And so that's all we're trying to do, is just create the support system to see more development around Indigenous foodways.
100%. One, so I want to talk about Indigenous foodways and kind of just jumping back, because this morning I saw an article about it's actually from Veg News, about how um, the animal agriculture is going to be discussed for the first time at the UN climate change conference. And I know you've spoken at the UN before, but to me, talking about regenerative agriculture, right? That's kind of bringing back to what is native, what you're doing in Native American cuisine and on the reservations. And correct me if I'm wrong, but can we have both? We don't need to all go vegan. We can do regenerative agriculture, right?
Yeah, I think that we should open up to a lot more protein options, of course, which is what we try to
Mm-hmm.
highlight. So just by
Right.
removing cows, pigs, and chickens, doesn't mean there's nothing left to eat. There's plenty of protein choices out there,
Right.
and including like insects and things like that. So we just want people to be very aware, and we just want to see a lot of more smaller scale meat production when it comes down to it. Also,
Mm-hmm.
we can help support a lot of that, because obviously, like, this massive industry of beef and pork and chicken, even turkey, is really disgusting. That's out there. Like, those factory farms are,
Right.
places that really shouldn't exist. But we it's going to take some time to get past that, of course, and we should really be supporting people who are growing and raising animals with a lot of care and respect and intention. And we don't have to eat 28 ounces of beef at dinner personally in a night. Like, we should just be a lot more responsible with protein choices when it comes to our diet.
Right. Um, So two questions that are going to come out of that is, you mentioned insects. So I do want, there was one article that you mentioned how many crickets that you serve or that you buy in a week. Can you tell the audience how many crickets you go through?
I think during the summertime, we're going through about 15 pounds a week. It was quite a bit, just because we put them on the menu and they're kind of lower priced and everybody tries
Mm-hmm.
them. So we just send a ton of them out there, and everybody
Mm-hmm.
likes them. Like, for some it's novel, and some people just really like them. And, it's
Right.
just, we make them taste good, because we cook them in maple water, and then we dry toast them in the oven, and then we toss them with a little bit of spicy seasoning, just lightly spicy. And they're a little sweet, a little spicy and savory, and we serve them with a seed mix, almost like a native granola mix, and it's tasty.
Well, and that's, it kind of sounds like when you roast nuts, right? With all the different spices on them and you eat that. So but it's just crickets, and you've got it's
It
got better
tastes good.
protein than, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's
And
super clean protein. It just goes right into your system. It's really good.
now, just as a tangent from that, because I've also forgotten the other question that I wanted to ask you, is that crickets actually have, for people who are food allergic, that has a cross relation to shellfish. Have you heard? Did you know that? Have you heard that?
Yeah, it's the same,
Yeah.
whatever chemical in the shells as
Right.
shrimp.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
people who have
Yeah.
shellfish allergy have to be careful.
Yeah. Exactly. That was the first I learned a couple of years ago. But the oh, okay. So we were talking about the health, and just before the show, we were talking about how you went to Terra Madre, which is Slow Foods Conference in Italy, and in 2018, I think it was when I was there, and I sat in a bunch of sessions about the Native American food systems, and a lot of it is about how the processed food that you had on the reservations when you were displaced, when et cetera. And but the health statistics of Native Americans is really a lot higher than most Americans. And is your work helping to change that? Are you seeing a lot of change in that?
We're seeing a lot of movement towards tribes pushing for more Indigenous food sovereignty. We're seeing a lot more initiatives happening out there. There's a lot of money coming into Indian country through farm bills and through other pieces to try and seed a lot of future projects around foodways. So I think things are shifting, and things are shifted immensely since, obviously, like when I first started my company in 2014, there was very little conversation going on about it on a national scale. And, and now like we've been able to see so much exposure happen and so many articles about indigenous foods. And, I feel like we've come a long ways. There's still a lot of work to do, but we do see a shift. And we do think that the younger generation, there's just so much information out there. We feel like they're shifting towards wanting to do something different, wanting to see more health options out there, and not just being stuck with things just because that's just the way, So,
Right.
but there's a lot of work. There's still a lot of food access that has to happen. There's still a lot of education
Right.
around indigenous foods that have to happen, and that's why we do the work that we do.
Well, and it was really startling to me, this picture that you showed, and I think it was your TEDx speech, of what this is a picture of what was found in the grocery store on the
Right.
reservation. And it just said, it was just a silver can and it said beef on it.
Yeah, and that's just
Yeah.
what we grew up with Commodity Food Program, So
Right.
Commodity Food Program, has been going to tribal communities for quite a few decades now. And, it's just a low nutritional food situation because there's a lot of foods that are just packed in way too much sodium, packed in way too many sugars. And then just like all those government processed meats, like so beef with juices and pork with juices and salmon and things like that. And like, that's just stuff I had to grow up with because that's what we had access to. And it's not very good. I know that the Commodity Food Program, they are working on trying to bring healthier foods, but they really need to, again, move with intention. They need to purchase products from indigenous food producers. They need to think regionally instead of trying to spread some of these food products out across the entire United States, and they just really, really need to focus on the USDA version of what is a healthy diet is just not correct. Like we need a lot of work, and especially we need to understand more cultural diversity. Like you can't plug everybody into one situation. Like, we should have cultural understanding when it comes to healthy diets that we're given to people.
Right. Now, how can chefs like my friend Chef Joel, who commented at the very beginning, how can they help introduce more Native American dishes and items into their menus on a daily basis in the meetings industry, in a hotel chef or a restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, I think like if there are some native growers or food operations happening in certain areas, that people should really be highlighting them and allowing those voices to come and talk about their work and really showcasing them. And we have to be very careful of just culturally appropriating just because it sounds cool, and
Right.
it sounds like we can make some money off of it, because it's not about that. Like we just really want to
Right.
see something happen. We want to see more native chefs coming up and indigenous chefs in general, just to be able to have the moment to identify what their foods mean to them,
Right.
and so there's a lot of work to do, and but there's a lot of opportunity, and there's indigenous peoples everywhere, and there's a lot of work going down in Mexico, a lot of work happening up in Canada and beyond. We see this as a global issue because there's indigenous peoples across the globe that have gone through the same colonial histories and same violence and destruction and assimilation and homogenization, and we just have to really see that as a global community of indigenous peoples, and we should be doing whatever we can to protect and steward their knowledge base for future generations.
So on one note on that, kind of taking that knowledge and not using it as, hey, we're putting you on the pedestal and we're going to use you, right? This question is, working with the Convention and Visitors Bureau or the city to promote the restaurant. I mean, I don't want them to use you for the sake of using you for that, but how can we, in the meetings industry, also support that? There is a push for meeting planners to say, hey, use local, but can the cities help with that?
Does
that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the just making things a little bit more equitable and just kind of spreading around opportunities for people, and really giving a lot of opportunities to BIPOC producers that have to really struggle to even get into to these situations. And I think that there should be a lot of intentionality about what kind of food we're serving and everything. And that's hard when you go to those big conventions, because those food service operations that they have very specific contracts with very specific food producer or distributors. And it's really hard to even bend their own rules to get anything special in. Because I've been to plenty of conferences where they ask me to bring some food, but then they're like, well, we're not really supposed to order that because it has to come through our food service operators. Like, well, if you want indigenous foods, you have to order, like you have to use indigenous foods. You can't, replace
Right.
it with European foods just because it's convenient. Like we have to try harder.
Right. Okay, so and on that note, I mean, that would be coming to you or finding a local, native, farm, that grows it and sells it, but it is growing outside. I mean, I even had that problem in April, just trying to get something that was vegan. No, we're not allowed to buy that because we can't get it from our preferred provider.
Yeah.
And it was, yeah.
Even
it was
on
something
tribal,
that's in the normal grocery store. Yeah.
even on tribal communities, because I'll go to some casinos and we'll be doing some events or conferences or something like that, and even they have the same rule sets because they hire outside entities to come in and to control their food service. And then same situation, they have very specific food service laws or rules. I wouldn't say laws, but rules around who they purchase their foods from. And it's hard to, even within some tribal communities, to get indigenous foods into those situations.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. But some people are going the opposite direction and just completely pushing back. Like we're working with a small school on Pine Ridge Reservation, and they decided to go against the USDA situation with what is healthy school lunches, because it obviously wasn't working. If the USDA thinks frozen pizza is a healthy school lunch, right? And then so they decided that they reached out and asked if we would help them with recipes. So we're really happy to be able to do that. But I went and visited them and realized like they didn't even have the resources anyways, because like their kitchen hadn't been updated since the 60s. So we're trying to send them a whole bunch of brand new equipment just to give them the right resources to cook with stuff, and then help them develop recipes and menus. And hopefully they can be a pilot that other schools can start to copy from, because we should be able to come up with all sorts of great recipes for them. And it's hard because they're doing it in real time right now with no resources. Trying to catch up as fast as we can, but there's just a lot of, I'm sure they're not the only situation like that across the way, and so many schools just aren't cooking foods anymore, whether they're indigenous or not. Like you're just hiring food service operators to come in and are just like steaming and warming foods that go out the door, and it's just not healthy. You look at any school lunch, it's awful.
Oh, I remember going to a school in Atlanta when I used to live there with my little sister. I was sponsoring, and it was Thanksgiving. And I just looked at the plate of the turkey, and I was grossed out by what.
Awful.
Yeah, I'm like, it was like a conglomeration of a bunch of different things pushed together to make turkey. Oh, it was gross.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I guess this is jumping way back to the original question a little bit, but the word decolonization and before the Europeans arrived, and when we're looking at that, have you seen change, and how can I do that, on a daily basis? I mean, I can remove black pepper. That's easy, right? I can remove chicken, and I think my mom and dad would have a cow. Well, pun intended, I guess. If I remove chicken, beef, and pork from their diets, and said, no, we're going to eat quail instead, Dad. My 80-year-old dad. But what does that really mean? I mean, you've said it kind of over in a variety of different ways, but can we make this change? It's going to be slow, and I fight for food allergy awareness. So
I think we can start slow. I think we can start with situations that have resources that can do this on a massive scale. So I think that school systems should really start to adopt and start to normalize not only just local foods, but culturally appropriate foods, and just being able to honor some indigenous foods of their region as they can. I think universities could easily do that. Like Montana State's been doing that for quite a few years now, for an example in Bozeman. And I think that there's other opportunities out there. I think that supporting BIPOC restaurants in general, and especially if you find any indigenous restaurants like Wapipa's Kitchen out in Oakland, or Tokabi out in Denver, or any of these kind of restaurants, Sly Fox Den out in the Northeast in Connecticut,
Okay.
And of course ourselves in Minnesota, like, there should be a lot of support for some of these pieces out there. Our Black Sheep Cafe is another one in Utah. So, we should just, especially on Indigenous Peoples Day, we should be really highlighting and
Mhm.
amplifying Indigenous voices for this day on our social
Right.
medias. And, doing whatever we can to support, help, and see what initiatives they're working on, and just see where support is needed.
Right. Exactly. And and it just so I have so many ideas of what we can do, right? And especially when you were hosting a meeting of 17,000 meeting planners today, and how could we have done that, right? Taken this day to highlight that as part of the whole event, right? And what we're serving and how we're serving it, because we're in Las Vegas. So
Yeah.
there's got to be that opportunity around us as well.
Absolutely, and it's just there's Indigenous peoples everywhere have the struggles, because there's the
Mhm.
Paiute band there in Vegas, and they're doing a lot of great work, but they're a very small band, and they went through a lot of a lot of hardships like everybody else did, and it's just showcasing all of this everywhere we go, and just bringing that respect, into things.
Mhm.
Especially days like Indigenous Peoples Day. If your conference happens to fall on that, then I think that we should be showing some respect, and so many cities are
Right.
still celebrating Columbus Day when it comes down to it, and
Right.
I
Yeah.
think that we should just really showcase the contrast of those two celebrations and what those mean.
Well, and even my friend Joan was posting pictures, and this is a challenge in the meetings industry as well, because I think there's only 85 days in the calendar year that don't have a government holiday or a religious holiday on it, and there's a lot of holidays that are planned on non-Christian holidays, and there's no thought given about it, right?
Hmm.
And 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 taking that into consideration as well. So, you know, I did an event a couple of months ago, and it was during Passover. So how do I manage the needs of the attendees who are Jewish, and following Passover during that time frame, right?
Hmm.
So, but same thing with this. So looking at when we're planning our food and beverage, how do we do that?
Absolutely, because it shouldn't be too hard to. You can reach out to an entity like ourselves or anybody else,
Hmm.
or you're bringing a native chef to feature, as something
Hmm.
special. So
Right.
there's all sorts of options that are out there because there's a lot of native chefs out there. There weren't that many just a few handful of years ago, and we've seen such an explosion of people moving into the culinary world, and obviously, like, for our group to win big awards like this last James Beard of best new restaurant in the entire nation, like that just helps
Hmm.
open up so many more doors and opportunity for other native chefs coming into the scene. And we just
Right.
really want to see that. We want to support all of them.
Right, exactly. Now, I wanted to jump back to slow food. How did that conversation go? And I forgot the name of the title of your session. Um, how did the session in at slow food go
It went
around the
really well.
indigenous?
Because
Yeah.
I don't remember the name of all of the attendees that were with me on that panel, but there was a lovely lady from Chiapas. There was a lady from India. There was a lady from I want to say Thailand. I can't remember, but she had that
Oh,
really
wow.
on wild foods of that area.
Uh-huh.
And It was a really great perspective to be able to listen to all these really powerful women who are super connected to their foodways and doing a lot of work of understanding, foods that are really truly indigenous to their region and highlighting a lot of that work around there. And, we all had very similar stories to tell with the works that we're doing. And we had just come from the night before doing a huge pop-up dinner outside of the Slow Food Terra Madra outside of Turin, where this castle from the year 1200 allowed us to do a pop up, and we had a entire team.
Wow.
I think we had about I don't know, a dozen native chefs. So we had a group of native chefs from Hawaii. We had a native chef group called Pioche Food Group from the Southwest that are good friends of mine, their family. I had one of my team members fly out to Italy to meet me and bring me some food products so we can do that. And, we just had this diverse group of indigenous chefs showcasing foods and flavors that Italians were very comfortable with, because there's things like corn and polenta and tomatoes and chocolate and vanilla and all these things, but
Hmm.
showcasing these are all North American flavors. Like these are our indigenous flavors.
Right. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I can't wait to go back. It's it's every 2 years, so I want to go to the next one.
Yeah, and we've done those
Um,
pop-ups every for the past 3 rounds, because there
yeah,
was we didn't have the one in like 2020 or whatever it was, but
right.
yeah, we've been able to do these huge pop-up dinners and just showcase, bring these indigenous foods and chefs over
Mhm.
to highlight that during that time period
Yeah.
on that global stage.
Yeah, and if you haven't been to Terra Madre, you can go. I mean, it's just a conglomeration of food from all over the world, and it's all about native and so slow for everybody. Slow food is about the opposite of fast food that we know,
Absolutely.
and getting to know, like Sean has been talking about this entire episode, getting to know what's local, what is native to your own community, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just stewarding techniques that have been around for a long
Mhm.
time, making really beautiful, wonderful products. I've been highlighting that. So in Italy, like that's so much of their lifestyle is very
Mhm.
regional and very traditional foods that people have been working on for centuries. And it's the same situation in the U.S. with Indigenous peoples and anywhere when it comes down to Indigenous peoples on a global scale.
Somebody just said, so grateful for this on this day, especially. Thank you. You're
Mm.
welcome. So I have two final questions for you.
For sure.
What is your favorite thing to eat and drink?
Well, I don't know. That's a tough question. It's like, what's your favorite song or something? I
Right,
don't know. I love tacos because Mexican food is indigenous food. If you just strip
right.
away beef, pork, and chicken, cream cheese, and things like that. But
Right.
yeah, I spend a lot of time in
What would you
Mexico.
put on your taco?
Oh, I just love, we make we make our own fresh nixtamal and tortillas for our restaurant. So we have bison tacos and
Okay.
duck tacos and pheasant tacos and all these kinds of tacos, and a lot of just vegan ones too. So Three Sisters and
Hmm.
stuff like that. So I think there's just, tacos are fun to eat in there. And we also
For
make
sure.
our own arepa, which is non-nixtamalized corn. So we make our own arepa dough and we make like little open face arepa sandwiches and things like that with all
Oh,
sorts of beautiful
yum.
toppings. It's good. You'll have to, when you get to
Yeah.
Owamni, you'll get to try.
I will definitely do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so my final question that I ask everyone is, what does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experience mean to you?
Um, I just think that anything with a lot of intention is really where it's at. So we just tried to do something different at our restaurant. So again, we were very focused on who we're purchasing products from and what kind of recipes we're creating. And, it's almost more powerful what's not on the menu as to what is on the menu when it comes
Mhm.
down to it. And, like even our wine program, knowing that beer and wine are obviously colonial products that, we decided to do it with intention. So we tried to focus on finding only BIPOC producers to have that conversation around privilege, right? Because
Mhm.
we had over 70 beer producers in Minnesota, and we're only able to find 2 BIPOC run breweries in the entire situation.
Wow.
And then for the wine thing, it was just a topic that nobody was talking about. I called lots of restaurateur friends all over the place. Nobody had even thought about it. Even my wine producers were just like, I don't know. So it took us a while, but we were able to find and source a lot of Native American owned wineries out in California. We were supporting some Mexican wines out of Val de Guadalupe and Baja. We found some Maori wines in New Zealand. We found some wines from South Africa run by people from South Africa. And there's just a lot of, again, there's a lot of intention that we can put into
Mhm.
every facet of what we choose to do.
That's a really good word about it. Food should have intention. It
Hmm.
shouldn't just be a
Absolutely.
checkbox. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people who are serving food to people should really understand that responsibility, and and start to think about that intention of what they are serving people, because like I travel so much and I feel like every menu out there just looks exactly the same. You can pretty much count on seeing some burgers and some nachos and some Caesar salad of some kind, and like
Yep.
there's very little like diversity out there, so homogenous, and I think we could do so much better. And that's why indigenous foods is exciting, because then our world vision is that one day we can drive across this continent in any direction, stopping at indigenous focused food businesses and experiencing the immensity of diversity that's out there in food, flavor, and culture.
Ah, that I love that, and it reminds me of a road trip that I took a couple of years ago with my niece from Denver down to the Grand Canyon, and
Mhm.
Airbnb the gentleman was Native American, and he's like, "Oh no, don't go through that. Don't go that route. I'm gonna take you through my reservation and go this route." And he opened our eyes to a whole nother thing that would have not been found on Google, and it was awesome. We had a
Right.
really good time
That's
seeing
awesome.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Super cool.
So, everybody, this has been Sean. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you spending time with me today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So, everybody, this has been Sean Sherman. Oh my gosh, I do it the wrong way all the time. And he is the CEO and founder of the Sioux Chef, and you can find him, as I just put it up there, on the Sioux Chef _, in the middle there on Instagram. And he's the owner at Owamni. Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Okay. In Minneapolis. So make sure that you go visit him there. And everybody celebrate Indigenous food traditions today if you can. And please celebrate the Native Americans who fed us when pre-colonization. So, Sean, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And everybody, I will be, this is a busy week. I will be here tomorrow, Wednesday and Thursday, different times. So check the schedule. But I'm excited to be live from IMEX this week and honored to spend this morning with you celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. So until next time, stay safe and eat well. Thanks.